During my second session, I'd like to say a little bit about the history of mobile cell phones. I'll begin by a quote from Communio et Progressio on the means of social communications, which was written in 1971, decades before cell phones were even in existence. And it says, quote, "The Church considers it to be one of her most urgent tasks to provide the means for training recipients of electronic media in Christian principles. This also is a service to social communication. The well-trained recipient will be able to take part in the dialogue promoted by the media and will demand high quality in communications," end quote. And I think this is an important one because it speaks to us as the receiver of a lot of this kind of media. I'll review briefly the history of the mobile cell phone, as well as some of the features and implications that have had social effects as a consequence of the availability of the cell phone use. As you well know, we no longer need a laptop in order to access the Internet. Internet has been available on the cell phone since 2003, but again, that's not that long ago. That's 7 years ago. This and more features are available on the cell phone. In 1973 was the first time that a wireless personal communication phone became available that did not run on electricity plugged into a car, for example. And it was Martin Cooper, who was then the general manager of Motorola Communications, who placed the first wireless phone call. The phone then was about 1.5 pounds in weight and had a lot of dropped calls. But he was very excited about making a phone call to his AT&T and Bell Labs rival, walking up and down the streets of New York on this wireless phone. Over time, they had to work on the fact that the cell dropped, create more satellites, and also do something with the size of the phone. And as you well know, they're now just a few ounces and quite thin, and towers are so available that most often, unless you're in Alma, Michigan, you don't have to worry about a lot of dropped cells. So while the cell phone has allowed persons to be available literally anywhere and anytime where cell phone towers are available, this availability has created an intrusiveness into face-to-face interactions that hasn't been experienced quite this way before the mobile cell phone, that you can carry in your pocket, you can carry, under a little bit anywhere. You know the examples. You're speaking to a sister, and all of a sudden her cell phone rings. What does she do? She interrupts the conversation she's having with you to answer the phone. You're at the airport, and you can be bombarded by several conversations that persons around you are having, waiting to get on the plane. Talking loudly about some things that are a bit surprising, or talking loudly about some things that are inconsequential while you're maybe trying to have a little quiet time before you get on the plane. But they're talking in a fashion and about things that they would not probably be saying if they were talking face-to-face to someone there at the airport. And it's that kind of behavior that we are seeing with electronic media that just wasn't there before. There's a social etiquette that's being lost that was in place even in our secular culture, that is being eroded, that we religious need to be careful about falling into as well. What about the cell phones that go off during Mass? This happens more often in a parish, but it can happen in a religious community. And what do? You're digging in your pocket to pull out this cell phone. And what does the person say? I'm at Mass. I can't talk with you. Well, how available do we really need to be when we are attending the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass? Some persons can be distracted by the ping on their cell phone, notifying them that they've just received an email. Or what about now the limitless number of minute plans that are available, which makes you not worry about the number of minutes that you're on the phone because it's, quote, free. Those are becoming very popular now. So this whole notion of free and accessible are factors that have really contributed to behaviors that I'll speak about in the next sessions to follow. Because it's free and it's so readily available, many businessmen and women are taking care of business while in the car. It can be for some the way to connect with friends. Now that's not always a bad thing, but for some it can be the visit that they no longer then have to actually make face to face. So suddenly, is it beginning to replace relationship by not going to see the person one-on-one and just substituting or making the whole of the relationship through some kind of electronic media, some kind of machine? These are the kinds of things that we do need to consider, certainly as religious, but even what is it doing to families where you can have several kids together saying that they're hanging together, but they're all on their cell phones, not talking to one another. I know a sister who ran a red light because she was distracted talking on the phone. Now, luckily, there was no accident, but it is causing a distraction to what we are doing in our glee of being able to multitask. We need to ask ourselves, for whom are we allowing ourselves to be constantly available? To whom or for whom are we now unavailable? Are we constantly on the alert, attentive to the possibility of an incoming call, which can erode my recollection, the quiet in my mind, even how I present myself at prayer? Does it help me feel a little bit more important if I get a lot of phone calls? Sisters can be jealous. The sister's getting a lot of calls. I know you've heard of some of this. Are we exhibiting a lack of social manners to those in our presence when interrupting face-to-face conversations by incoming calls or emails? I think there's a subtle thing that's happening that's getting a blur between what is urgent and what is important. Something that interrupts can have the feel of being urgent, but it may not be very important. And it may interrupt something that really is important that is transpiring or that I'm trying to do. The blur between urgent and important. Are we prolonging conversations because we're not tethered to a land phone and multitasking? Speaking on the phone and doing something else because the person can't see what we're doing. Who knows what else we might be doing? Does using the cell phone in this manner increase an unnecessary sense of busyness that actually contributes to my internal agitation or feeling a little stressed? Do we use a cell phone out of necessity or a personal preference? These are things I think we can ponder in our own use of the cell phone. Another popular use of the cell phone is text messaging. The term text messaging or texting refers to brief written messages between mobile phones over cellular networks. And these messages are usually 160 characters from mobile phones, although now with the iPhones and these more modern phones, more characters can be sent. Apparently you can send 160 characters, and if you type beyond it, you can send out 20 pages worth of 160 characters that the other person gets. These not only include now the written word, but also images, videos, and sound content. Well, how is it that the text message first evolved? Apparently in 1989, a man by the name of Edward Lance, who was a former NASA employee, took his Motorola beeper, turned it upside down, and punched in some numbers to try to create some letters to send a little text message. As you can imagine, that was kind of cumbersome, so it didn't go very far. A couple of years later, the hearing impaired tried to consider using this as sending messages because it would allow them to communicate before the advent of the cell phone in its popular availability. But it really wasn't until this past decade that it's become very, very popular, especially among the youth. Nielsen Company did a report in 2008 looking at teenagers between the ages of 13 and 17. And I was startled by this, and I looked them up again, and it was the right numbers. But they said that of a group of teenagers that they studied, they averaged 2,400 text messages a month. Well, if I do my math correctly, that's 60 text messages a day. And they averaged a total of 240 voicemail messages a month. As I do my little math again, that's 8 voicemail message a day. Not including, apparently, the games that they play on their phones, browsing the web, taking pictures, and logging their hours on social networking sites. Teachers, I'm sure you can tell me a lot more about this than I am aware of, are concerned about the decline in the quality of the children's written communication, but apparently it's also encroaching on their verbal communication. They've developed a whole little language on the text phone. U is Y-O-U. Totally is T-T-L-Y. LOL is laughing out loud. And apparently there's little codes if your parent is coming into the room. And they use lower cases instead of a capital I for I, myself as the subject. It takes less time to make it a little I. So it's doing detrimental things to their grammar. And this is being translated to when they're trying to do a written assignment, try to get them to write an essay where you have full sentences. So it's eroding at their capacity for language, both written and verbal, but also their desire to integrate material into a cohesive wholeness that is of concern for teachers. They're beginning to lack conversational skills, and they're missing nonverbal social cues. So studies are being done, and they're putting these preteen and teens at a table and asking them what they pick up. And they're just not as attentive because they haven't been formed to learn the meaning of the nonverbal cues, some of the facial expressions, the tone of voice, the body posture, because all of that is absent in their electronic communications. So what is that doing to the relational communication and the effect that it has on relationship? I'll say a little bit about that in my later presentations. Texting today apparently is something now that car insurance companies are looking at because, not surprisingly, it's contributing to accidents. The leading cause of car accidents is talking on the phone and texting behind the wheel. Why? Both lead to distraction and driver inattention, of course. Teenagers say that their number one driver distraction is texting. So now they are looking at the number of teens that are texting while driving. 21% of fatal car accidents involving teenagers between the ages of 16 and 19 was the result of cell phone usage. And 50% of a group of teenagers being surveyed in different studies now being done across the country say that they are driving and texting. Half of them are. In an effort to educate the teens about the dangerousness of texting while driving, there are many YouTube videos. And in preparation for this presentation, because I was reading these statistics, I did go online and took time to look at a few of them. And there are possibly hundreds of them. And essentially this is the theme. You have a teen that is texting while driving. There's a fatal accident. And then the next scene is this teen's friends are at this teenager's funeral, crying. It's a way to try to get the teenagers to appreciate this is dangerous business. You cannot be texting while driving. 50% of them are now doing it. NBC in June of 2009 sponsored an experiment in which they compared driving while legally intoxicated and driving while on a cell phone and while texting on a deserted airstrip. And this experiment showed that being legally drunk added 4 feet of stopping distance while going 70 miles per hour. Reading an email added 36 feet to stopping distance while going 70 miles per hour. Sending a text message added 70 feet to driving 70 miles per hour and trying to stop. What does this demonstrate? That texting while driving is more dangerous than driving while intoxicated. That's a sobering thought. Another example of the distraction behind the wheel is the 2008 Chatsworth train collision, which many of you might have heard about, which killed 25 passengers. And an investigation revealed that the engineer of that train had sent 45 text messages while operating the train. This is a brief overview of some of the cell phone usages. I'll say a little bit more about another cell phone usage later in a presentation that talks about a concern of the images that are now available on cell phone and how that affects individuals. But I won't go into that now. So at this point, I'd like to close my description of the history of the internet use and cell phone use and open this up to some discussion and questions.